Section 5, Qualia and Homeostasis. Key to this evolutionary explanation, according to Damasio, is that, quote, the functional divide between pleasure and pain states, which are correlated respectively with optimal and smooth life managing operations in the case of pleasure, and impeded problem-ridden life-managing operations in the case of pain, end quote. Again, these remarks of Damasio are very close to the ideas of Panksepp, who sees a direct evolutionary line between the mechanisms which maintain homeostasis, the systems which generate subjective emotions and consciousness itself. Damasio refers to life-managing operations, which surely is more or less the same as homeostasis, and suggests that pleasure signals homeostatic states which should be pursued, while pain marks states to be avoided. Pleasure and pain feel different, says Damasio, because they are mappings of very different body states, quote. Just as a certain red is different from a particular blue because they have different wavelengths, and the voices of sopranos are different from those of baritones because their sound frequencies are higher, it is often overlooked that information from the body's interior is conveyed directly to the brain by numerous chemical molecules that course in the bloodstream and bathe parts of the brain that are devoid of blood-brain barrier, end quote. He goes on to say that there are a huge number of these transmitter-modulator molecules. As the blood bathes the receptive areas of the brain, these molecules directly activate neurons. He asks, what do the signals that arise in such areas end up causing? And suggests that, quote, a reasonable guess is that they cause or modulate feelings, end quote, which are then communicated as qualia to other centers in the brain. Damasio next introduces two phenomena in the brain-body system, which he believes also have a crucial role in generating or at least influencing the production of qualia. The first is map making in the brain, and especially the interlocking of different types of map. The second is the influence of what he calls sensory portals. Damasio uses visual maps to illustrate the interaction of these two phenomena. He says that visual maps are sketches of visual properties such as shape, color, movement, depth. These four maps of different visual properties are then interconnected, cross-fertilizing their signals, as Damasio puts it. This merged map then produces a blended multi-dimensional visual scene. Quote, if one takes this blend and adds to it information from the visual portal to the effect that the flesh around the eyes is involved in the process and a component of feeling, it is reasonable to expect a full-blown, properly qualified experience of what is being seen, end quote. He says that the sensory portals are involved in gathering the information. For example, changes in the sensory portals play a role in the build-up of perspective and also contribute to the construction of perceptual quality. But how do they do this? To attempt to answer this question, Damasio switches to the sound modality. Quote, "We know where the sound maps are created in the brain, but we hear the sounds both in our ears and with our ears. In all probability, we feel sounds in our ears because our brains are assiduously mapping both the information that comes to the sensory probe from the entire auditory signaling chain, including the cochlea, and the slew of co-occurring signals coming from the apparatus that surrounds the sensory device. In the case of hearing, this includes the epithelium skin covering our ears and the external ear canal, along with the tympanic membrane and the tissues holding the system of the ossicules that transmit mechanical vibrations to the cochlea. To this, we must add the small and not so small head and neck movements that we constantly make in an automatic effort to adjust the body to the sound sources. This is the auditory equivalent of the notable changes that occur in the eyeball and the surrounding muscles and skin when we are in the process of looking and seeing, and it adds qualitative texture to the percepts." End quote. Similarly, the feelings of smelling or tasting or touching arise, Damasio claims, via the same sort of mechanism. Quote, "For example, our nasal mucus contains olfactory nerve endings that respond quite directly to the conformation of chemical molecules in odorants. That is how we come to map scents and how we deliver jasmine or Chanel number 19 for their encounter with ourself." End quote. Then, I assume to illustrate the power of these reactions, he takes an example where a smell irritates the nerve endings in the nasal mucosa, i.e., quote, "when you put too much wasabi on the sushi and are forced to sneeze," end quote.